between the bodies.
Well, good evening, everyone. It is 6:30 on February 15th. This evening, we have a joint work session between the Harbor Board, the Petersburg Borough Harbor Board, and the Petersburg Borough Assembly. And we won't take any comments from audience. And we have a list of things to go over. I believe Clerk Thompson has printed out enough for everybody in the room. And so with that being said, I don't really have any input at this time, but would the harbor master like to speak? Or what we're looking at, I guess, unless you just want to see how it goes and then interject when you'd like.
Talking to the mic.
Oh, sorry. Sure, I don't know how formal it'll be or if I can just.
Well, it's not real formal, like, just
Yeah.
don't talk over one another and, that kind of thing.
Right,
So, yeah.
you guys get sick of hearing from me, so. Well, maybe we'll let Bob and I think Casey is prepared to, put some thought into it and has kind of a formal.
This is basically just to discuss harbor port leases, and it's probably generated by the current sale of one of those leases to Weecon Enterprises. And also there's a spreadsheet here that the manager put together with a dollar value of the leases that are where the money goes to the harbor. So that number is there on a separate page. So one of the discussion items is how to compensate the harbor ratepayer for the loss of annual lease payments through proceeds from the sale of property. And if I'm not mistaken, well, we haven't, to my knowledge, negotiated or talked about what will happen with the one lease that was sold to Weecon Enterprises, and that's $4,000 and $4,032 annually. But if you total all of the leases up and count how many there's a number of them, it comes to $157,129.63. The largest of those being from Petro 49 Incorporated, and that's multiple leases. And their lease annually is $72,617.82. So I guess that's the first discussion item, is how to compensate the harbor. If this property is sold, does the proceeds from that go instead of into the general fund or the property development fund? Does it, where should it end up? So that's one of the discussions. So any comments on that? And I guess we'll just go down this list of discussion items, and then we could also go over the suggested ordinance changes. And then there's some notes here from the Attorney Heidemann as well. So there's a few things to go over. So any thoughts on how to compensate the harbor ratepayer for the loss of the annual lease? The harbor operations budget probably isn't going to shrink in the future. So, Bob, Janice.
Hey, thanks you guys for calling this work session. It's a nice we can get together and talk about these things without worrying about the Open Meetings Act and without a motion on the floor, when it's always seems like it's a little awkward time to be going back and forth. So I guess I'll start out. That was the first point I thought we could address is the very least, the lease payments, some kind of a budget item from the general fund or wherever that money goes from the property development fund to offset the loss of the lease payments to the harbor. But there's also the issue of is that really compensating the harbor? Because long ago, the harbor enterprise developed that property and put money into it. And that's the question, whether or not that actually compensates the harbor, but it's a good start.
Okay, any other harbor board members or assembly members having any input on ideas on how to compensate the harbor?
But, as a harbor master, it was, it's a little frustrating to realize that your mortgage went to, you know, develop that land and to, you know, all of that. And then it was an avenue in which we got income. It's about 8% of our budget is coming from that. And then that to go away, as well as the outright, can't really say purchase of the property, but certainly the development of it. It was the first project that the Harbor Enterprise took on back in the early 80s, after becoming an enterprise fund and realizing that the waterfront needed some protections in order to maintain this waterfront community. And then, you know, to just have it go to the general fund was like, well, okay. You know, because we know that there are 19 leases, and probably a lot of them will come before you. And is all of that, all of those monies going to go to the general fund rather than back to the Harbor Enterprise Fund? And also then the lack of income, annual income, we're out as well, which is going to be a direct raise in rates. Will directly result in rates. So you know, it's kind of a philosophical thing. I think Casey has some comments too to that point. He ran them by me that.
Well, I guess my main comment would be, why wouldn't the proceeds just go to the Harbor Enterprise Fund? I mean, it seems like that would be the presumption. And unless there's a good reason otherwise, which I'm certainly open to. But is that not the presumption for some reason?
You know, and I don't think we crossed that bridge before we agreed on the sale of the one leased piece of property. That is something that the assembly can address, and after a conversation with the manager today, and Steve, if I misspeak, correct me, please.
Okay.
But, that money could be directed to the Harbor Enterprise Fund. And if that's, you know, they've got the investment on developing the land earlier, and, you know, they're gonna lose the lease amount. And I haven't, you know, it's hard to say what the land is appraised at, what it would actually sell at, you know, and I don't know what the land sold exactly to Weecon Enterprises, but their annual lease was $4,032. So if it was $100,000, would that be 25 years worth of lease money, roughly? I mean, without getting the calculator out. So, you know, I don't at this point have any objection to going that direction. You know, as far as the money being put in the Harbor Enterprise Fund. So just speak up if you have a comment. Donna, I see, raised her hand, and since she's zooming in, go ahead, Donna.
Okay, yeah, thanks. I understood that there was something in code that would set the sale of borough-owned property would go to the property development fund. I don't know if that would require a code change or not. Manager Giesbrecht or Clerk Thompson, I don't know if you could shed any light on either on that. But it would make sense that the sale of tidelands, waterfront leased lands would definitely go to the harbor, considering its own investment in developing those pieces, as well as the lost revenue. It would put a lot of harbor users at a great disadvantage to see these rates increase. You know, if it makes up 8% of the harbor budget, and now the ratepayers have to make up that 8%, that's going to be substantial, as well as increasing costs outside of this issue.
And you
Mr. Mayor?
have an answer to that? Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, just a quick thing. So we started giving the harbor the revenue from these waterfront leases about 12 years ago. Right after I got here, we changed that. the revenue used to go to the general fund. And I think we had never sold a lease before, so we followed the procedures of what we do on real property, which when the borough sells property, the money goes to the property development fund. So when the Wecon thing sold, shame on me, I guess. We just followed the old procedures that we've always used, and the sale of that went to the general fund. Does not have to be that way. As Assembly Member Marsh said, there might be an ordinance somewhere that says it. I'm not even sure there is. I think it's just kind of like how we've always done it. But to Donna's point, replacing the revenue is a little harder. That would be some kind of an automatic draw coming out of the general fund every year. And our general fund would have a really tough time adding to that with everything else that we're having to come up with. So it's easier on the sale because we're not, that's just rerouting that money. The revenue would be a different problem.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. And thanks, Steve, for that. A couple of points on that one. One, to Donna, Member Marsh's point, I'm feeling a little my own frustration on that confusion, given that vote which took place several months ago. I was very clearly under the impression that money had to go to the general fund as opposed to be allocated towards the harbor. That would have been, I would have liked that data. No, not necessarily frustrated with anyone in particular on that one. Just seems like a very valuable data point as we're sitting in this room right now talking about it, looking at the future. I guess from my own position as an assembly member, I think that money from any leases should most certainly go to the harbor for all of the obvious reasons Glo has laid out, investment, et cetera. I don't need to further elaborate on that. This is farther down the line, and so we don't need to address it right now if folks don't want to. But when I've been looking at this issue of harbor leases, the bigger question to me, and any of you cut me off, interrupt me, I won't be offended, is not deciding, I think it's important, these protocols when we do. But for me, the one that jumps out at me is like, if we should, which certain ones, the criteria based on, should this one be sold to private hands or should the lease remain in borough hands, and developing, I listened to the meetings when that was decided to be sold. It was a messy process as evidenced by some of the holes we're seeing in it now. And I'm looking at the draft process for how to go about this. I'm not sure there's a way to solve this, and I would look forward to anyone's input. It's all pretty subjective of who is worthy of this piece. Should we sell it to them, or should just transfer the lease and keep those the lease payments coming in? And again, it's more of the bigger conversation of how we decide which ones to sell and which ones to keep. Because like it's already been said, great. We sell this, harbor gets the money. To me, it's a no-brainer. But the bigger picture to me is how we manage our long-term waterfront. If we sell all of it, then we don't have any borough-owned, harbor-owned waterfront, excuse me. And I don't want to speak for anyone, but I'm not sure that's the vision we want to take as an assembly or as a harbor board. And if anyone feels like delving to that now, we can, or we can get into it in the draft process. But that's one that sticks in my mind. That's all for now.
Clerk Thompson.
I just wanted to say that I don't believe that it's too late for the Wecon revenue to go to the harbor. The sale is not yet complete. They have not paid the full amount. So.
Yeah, yes, the manager mentioned that to me earlier today, and the intention is to pay it,
Of course,
the
yes.
sale, but it hasn't all been received yet. And when we were involved in this discussion with the sale of the land to the Wecon Enterprises, I can't remember my exact words, but I made the statement that I would handle it personally on the assembly as a case-by-case basis. I felt at the time strongly that was, not a bad decision to sell that piece of land. And if you look into it further, recommendations or comments by our attorney on, you put a covenant in there, restrictive covenant that it has to be used for marine property, then the only way, if the leaser or owner at the time, if that's the case, you'd probably have to take them to court to get them to not, take legal action for them, to not do what they wanted to as a job or as a business venture on their property. She suggested potentially the best way, if we continue down this road, where we potentially sell these, land that's leased now to the leasers at the time or someone else, you could do it by zoning. And then if it's an ordinance and it was in a, zoned and they're not following what the zoning is, then you could, enforce something at that time through that, but I'm just throwing out what I've been reading here, so. Any other comments on, the compensation to the harbor? I don't think, especially in the state of the fisheries right now, I don't think any commercial fisherman wants to see their mortgage rates go up. So, at some point, we should, in my opinion, visit the subject of where the money goes. That's what we're talking about. I mean, from the one we've already sold. And yeah, I agree with Clerk Thompson. I don't think it's too late to route that money from the sale of the property to Weecon Enterprises. And that's, it's not in perpetuity, but it's 25 years worth of lease. And you hear discussion around town about other leaseholders, coming forward. In fact, the Island Refrigeration already has applied, and I heard there's other, entities looking into purchasing their land that they lease. So like I said, my opinion is a case by case basis. And that would not be, an easy decision or easy discussion to go through and vote on either. So I don't know what the answer is at this point. So anybody else have any input? Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, I felt at the time when we made that decision that we failed to look at the bigger picture and address that first before we sold that land, and I still feel the same way. There's two issues on the table here. One is a short term, giving money to them, and the other one is the long term. And how do you put that same money back in the pocket each year? And I frankly don't have an answer for that one with what I see coming down the line here. And that's one I think we're gonna have a lot more discussions on, because I just don't know the answer to that one. And up front on this one, I have no problem with that money going into the harbor fund at all.
And Steve or Debbie, so to direct that money from that one sale that we've did, would that be done by the assembly? Would it have to be an ordinance drafted that said that if there was a leased land sold or harbor property or borough property, whatever you want to call it, that's under the control of the harbor, sold, the money goes to the Harbor Enterprise Fund? How would we have to do that? I mean, it's some action would have to be taken, I would think.
So for the future, if there's future sales, I would think that we would want to go ahead and put it in 1616 ordinance. And 1616 is for all tidelands, so it's not just harbor or port leases, it's all tidelands. So we may want to put the assembly may give proceeds to the harbor, because there are tidelands that are leased right now that are not harbor revenue, and they may apply to purchase those as well. So we just have to kind of think of everything. But yes, I think that should go in an ordinance. And as far as the Weecon sale, I don't think that would need to be by ordinance at this point. You've already approved the sale, but I will check into that and let you all know.
So are there other leases? These are, all I know is that there are 25, the borough has 25 leases. 19 of them are harbor. So I take issue with of calling even them tideland leases, because I mean, Sherry used that in her argument that she was 50 feet or 50 yards away from the tide, from the edge of the tidelands. And so technically it wasn't a tideland. So I would like to reterm these as port leases, just so it's so confusing, because people get really hung up on that word Tideland. So, but that's I come back to,
Waterfront that you took issue with.
Okay.
Waterfront leases.
okay, waterfront.
And there are a couple leases that are tidelands that are not,
Okay, so which one would those be?
Don Hughes for one.
Okay, yep, okay.
Who else? Let me look at my list.
Because for the most part, most leases that the borough has, I think some people think that the borough has all this property out there that they could sell and they could lease, and realistically, the leases are pretty much a harbor thing. And there's the other leases that the borough has are things like telephone poles and there's the state street lights and things like that, that really probably will never be a purchase, a come up for purchase. Yeah, the Rod and Gun Club has something and there's a driveway, but primarily when you talk about borough leases, you're talking about the harbor. They're harbor related leases that the harbor gets. So it really, I think, lends itself to having a really straightforward protocol for leases. Because the borough does not lease other than really.
Well, I mean, we do, but I agree, but the bottom line is chapter 1616 is all about tidelands, period.
Right.
It's not just tideland leases or tideland sales, it's
Yeah,
tidelands.
I get
And
that.
that's where we need to put this information into,
Yeah.
is the tidelands ordinance.
Okay. Oh,
And so
got
I
it.
was just pointing out that
Yeah,
it could happen that there would be another tideland lease that is not a port lease. And that the assembly would need to deal with, so. But anyway, yes, that should go, those were, however you guys want to handle the proceeds of the sale should be, I think, in an ordinance so that it's pretty black and white.
That makes sense. Go ahead, Bob.
One last little thing on proceeds. So whether the proceeds would go to the harbor, which it sounds like we're talking about, but sometimes those lease payments are a little bit sweeter than the value of the land would imply. And I think that's why like when it came up with the Petro trade, I think it was a pretty sweet deal, given that time of low inflation and stuff. I think they wanted out of their lease because it was a pretty good one for the harbor. So the property value might not completely compensate the harbor for that lost lease revenue. Maybe that lease revenue could be factored into the appraisal or something to make sure that it's not a loss that way. But like I say, it depends. I don't know if it's a 10% lease and inflation 6%. More that in mind.
So any other comment? Go ahead, Scott.
So after the week on sale, I approached the manager and the clerk about the proceeds of the sale, which was $100,000 going to the harbor department. They indicated to me that they would have to, they said, it won't take an ordinance change. It's just something the assembly can vote on, and this should be an easy deal. We're gonna contact Jody Tao, talk to her, and I never heard back. I questioned them twice about it, and I haven't heard anything back. And then this issue of a work group came up, and I thought, I'll just kind of let it ride and see what develops. But yeah, it's 25 years of lease, but I think the real question here is moving forward. So we give the lease up, and now we get property tax. So the issue to me is, how do we allocate that new property tax, which is roughly the equivalent of the lease payment to the harbor department? That's my take on it.
If I'm correct, Clerk Thompson, don't the leasers pay the property tax on the leased land?
Yes,
So we get property tax from the leases. Does that property tax then go not to the harbor, it goes into,
correct.
general fund? No.
Debbie or Mayor, this is Steve. Debbie, is the property tax on the land, or is it on the improvements they've made?
You're correct. It's on the improvements.
Okay.
Okay.
So the property tax, if the land is sold, will increase, right? Yes.
Yeah, so what we're missing would be, let's just take the Weekon's property. They paid a lease on the value of the land itself. We billed them for a property tax on the building. if the land sells like it has, we will then exchange a lease payment from them to a property tax payment on the land, as well as property tax on the continued receive on the building.
So then, yeah, okay, there would be more property tax collected from that particular parcel.
Yes, less, the lease revenue would go away, but the property tax revenue would increase because we'd be getting it on the land, well, like we did not before. The challenge is, and I think even, somebody else mentioned it earlier, the value of the land is not much. So, but I mean, again, it's probably a wash. I'm not sure if Jody's ever done the analysis on it to see, the lease revenue versus the property tax revenue. I'm not sure what is more.
Well, there are some that I know are valued at 6%, and then there are others that are 10%. And it has to do with the era that they were.
The lease
Okay,
amount.
Yeah.
Okay. And property taxes 10, 11, or whatever the millage rate set out annually. So,
That's like 1%, right?
Yeah, and I don't know if property tax can be earmarked for a specific purpose. That's probably an attorney question. I mean, yeah, I'm just not sure that can happen. But I mean, there's other ways to skin that cat too.
any other thoughts on that first topic, how to compensate the harbor? It sounds like the assembly is pretty much in, favor of any sale money would end up going to the harbor department. Then the next discussion item was how to ensure marine industrial use of the parcel and hold potential buyers to their stated intentions. And I kind of mentioned, in this handout we got, I think it's on the back of the ordinance change suggestions sheet, it's second page from Attorney Heidemann. And this was questions that Chairman Martin from the Harbor Board had in this part of the discussion. And she suggested zoning. So Liz, would that be something that, would that take a change, that zoning change, that'd have to go planning and zoning, I would assume, and what are the hoops to jump through for that, do you anticipate?
How much time do you have? We don't currently have a zoning district that would limit uses just to marine industrial, so we would have to create a new zoning district for that. And then that would be an ordinance, and you'd want to run that through the planning commission, and then it would go to the assembly. And then go back and decide where you want to apply that zoning district, which would go to the planning commission and then back to the assembly for approving the change. I would say, I think, and, I would have to talk to Attorney Heidemann about this, but there's a couple of different methods. One is creating a brand new zoning district. The other option is to do something that some communities down south do, which is called an overlay district. So you would keep your industrial zoning and then create a small overlay for waterfront industrial or marine industrial. And that way, you could name it Port Dock Overlay or something. And that kind of gives everyone an understanding that this is very specific to this area. It's not a zoning district. We could apply anywhere else in service area 1, but sort of name it port or whatever you want to call it, and just let people know that it's very specific for this specific area. So I think there's, 2 options there that we could consider.
All right, go ahead, Member Lynn.
Yeah, couple of questions, Liz, to follow up on. How is it zoned now, and what are the restrictions? And if we were to change that zoning to your idea or Attorney Heidemann's idea, how would the restrictions change? And it would, when you weigh benefits, the pros and the cons, how would you see that? And I guess then my other question is which one would provide the most protection to maintain what we want to maintain?
The restrictions, currently, all that property is zoned industrial, which is the the least restrictive we have, right? So you could go all the way from residence to a cement factory, all of those uses are potentially available to, in the industrial district. So to do something that is marine industrial, the key would be to have a good definition of the purpose of that district and then define what would be allowed in that district. I would think you would do something like eliminate all the residential uses, if that's what you wanted to do. And then you could name what uses would be allowed. But then allow, the things that we allow in industrial as far as the development of the property where we don't have setbacks and things like that. We allow a higher, a more intensive level of construction, but you would just name the uses. But I think eliminating the residential would be the big, and some of the retail, hotel, things like that, customer-based uses. And then as far as what would be the best for enforcing, I think was the second question. So we have code enforcement ordinances when someone violates the zoning code. And that's a pretty involved process where we have to give a lot of due process to the owner. So we talk in 30-day increments, 30 days to address an issue, 30 days for you to respond, 30 days we'll send you another letter, another 30 days go by. And we kind of gradually go through about 3 or 4 letters. So now we're like 4 or 5 months into it before we start getting serious. The borough as the land use authority has enforcement power. So you can go all the way to literally forcing someone, we've never done this, of course, but forcing someone to shut down their business or to move a building. Those are kind of at the extreme end. We've never even had to actually go to court or anything on any of our nuisance enforcement actions. So that would, I can't really say for sure how it ends because we've never had to go that far, so.
Thank you.
Would conditional use permits be allowed?
Again, that would be up to, the assembly on what they want to allow. That's for those that don't know, conditional use permit is something that might be okay, but it has to go to the planning commission for approval. So it's sort of an added use that you could do with the approval of the planning commission. As opposed to what is a by right use, which is you automatically can do that on the land.
Sounds complicated. So if we did the overlay zoning or whatever Liz called it, and we wanted all these leases that we currently have, that were supposed to be, is there anywhere now that says they're harbor related or just says they're industrial? That's it. So you go into some of these, and then one of our discussion points was annual review of compliance of all existing leases. Comply to what? Industrial.
Well, their lease, what they signed up for in their lease. I mean, are they actually doing what they were, allowed to lease that land for, I guess?
Each lease has a use.
Yeah,
I see. So that's where you would go to. So if we.
yeah, and it would sure be nice if we had more than, really, right now, it's left to, well, when they go to sell it. That's kind of when the borough can step in and say, hey, the next user has to follow these, we're gonna negotiate a lease. Right now, it's, as we've seen, that they morph off in different directions and there's no way to pull them back because we don't have a code for that.
So, I see the value of trying to regulate and control the use especially to, you know, years down the road when these people, maybe they comply with the intent of a marine industrial. But we currently have a leaseholder with 2 leases that's not complying, and we're not regulating it. So how can we sit here and try to dictate what's going to happen in the future when we're not regulating and controlling what's happening now?
Yeah, that was one of my thoughts going through my mind. Remember Marsh, you had your hand up?
Yeah, thank you. On the issue of non-compliance presently, I think that might even be a different topic. I appreciate Liz's suggestions of having the overlay. To me, that makes sense because therein we can create definitions that specify what can or cannot be done. And I think this whole discussion was precipitated by the week on lease, sale of the week on property, or the lease property. And so, yeah, going forward, I think it presents a procedure where we can be assured and subsequent people who sit on the assembly or harbor board or any position in the community can be assured that we can meet the industrial or the marine use industrial overlay. So how enforcement might be something. I do like the idea of the annual review for non-compliance. As far as penalties, I don't think we would need to get into the nuts and bolts of that right now. But I think compliance would be a good thing to pursue. But I think in my mind, those are 2 different issues. But we would need to make sure that any kind of overlay with definitions, parameters that we set on it should be clearly defined. And so that people investigating the purchase of a leased land or a new business will know very plainly what they need to follow or there's consequences.
Basically signing a contract in a sense.
So I put a lot of thought to this, and I understand the history of it, and a lot of that land was created from money from commercial fishing to, the land was clear up where Common Grounds is now, and now it's clear out, a long ways. I would like, I'm just speaking out loud, just throwing things out, come up with ideas, because we need to come up with ideas on how to move forward. And I really view the waterfront as an important mechanism for the community to regulate commerce. And I view the harbor department as the mechanism to, to regulate the commerce. I would like to differentiate the actual waterfront from land that is 200-300 yards from the waterfront. Why don't we let go those leases that are that far from the actual water and then retain and create a new waterfront master plan that only includes the actual waterfront, which is the important aspect of what we're discussing for the betterment of the harbor department and the borough, and then the land inside of that would be, go to whatever private enterprise decides it needs to go to, whether it's a coffee shop or a chocolate shop or whatever. But at least we maintain the actual waterfront, which is the important aspect of the revenue, the commerce that we need to regulate.
Well, and to that point, the waterfront, again, it's that word I hate, but is the land on the watcher side of your main street. And the reason why that is important is because back in the day, Weekons could unload a seine skiff at the face of the port dock, and you would not have gotten to retain a DOT permit to transport it to their shop to work on the engine. That's why, that is why that piece of property, it was valuable to them. As, you know, as it was very valuable, that port was very valuable to take a bait house off and not have to go on the main highway and get a DOT permit. You can ask Eric Roosevelt, he was fined for taking a seine skiff down the highway after hours because a DOT officer saw him. And so that's why that's value. That's why the approach to the drive down is so valuable for storage for bait houses, because those are all, you know, parts of a big business that they can't, you know, they come in on a Friday night, they can't get a permit to take it over out to their shop, so it's stationed there. So I would maintain that, we're gonna call it waterfront or whatever, anything that's outside that side, the water side of the main highway. And that's currently what the waterfront master plan.
Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah.
It's just that moving forward, you know, we're trying to capture and hold future leaseholders or property owners, I guess we're proposing, to certain specified uses. And we're not currently holding people accountable within that framework now, so how are we gonna do it in the future? Like, why can we make all the rules, but if people don't listen to them, then like the mayor says, we're gonna take them to court.
Well, that's what we're here begging for, man. Give us a mechanism to, you know, annually review.
Ideas,
Yeah, exactly.
what we're here to do.
Right, right. But that being said, you get 6 inches inside of, I mean, I don't know what you're calling, where can we go that is water, that you would term as new waterfront? I mean, I don't know of any other. I mean, it's, all the waterfront is already there and we've already identified it. We can't, unless we make new, which we did in the court case, we made new. And so released it.
Well, there are still lease lots on the waterfront that aren't currently being used. Don Hughes, and then what Island Refrigeration wants. Those are available lots that are not currently being used for anything.
Oh, yeah, they're being used. I mean, we store every day on them.
Well, no,
And-
they're not actively being used by a commercial enterprise.
Well, they were. I mean, that's where Fleet Refrigeration got his start. That's where McFadden was. That's where, I mean,
Land that Island Refrigeration wants is empty.
no, it isn't. I mean, we're using it. We use it for, sure, we use it for monthly.
Right, but it's
Right.
not being used by private enterprise.
Yeah, I'll just pipe in real quick here. I appreciate everybody coming out and chatting about this. I think it's a really important issue, and I'm really happy to see this draft ordinance suggestion. You know, and I think I feel like it addresses a number of Member Newman's concerns. You know, I hear you loud and clear, like the problem is sort of a lack of protocol and a lack of enforcement. And I think the lack of enforcement arises primarily because there's not really much to enforce. Now, there's some talk of the lessees, right? Using the leasehold property for things that are not allowed under the terms of the lease. And that may be the case, but we're also talking about industrial use property here, which, as we just explained, you know, it's kind of wide open what you do with that property. So, you know, absent like any more information, I'm inclined to believe that we'd have a hard time, you know, doing an annual review as things currently stand and changing the behavior of these lessees based on terms in the lease. I could be wrong though. I'd want to know more, but it seems to me that if that's the issue, then the solution has been pretty clearly presented here. I mean, if we want to control how people are using property, the way to do that is through zoning. Absolutely. I mean, that's what communities across the nation do. You know, if we're worried about this property being used, that, I feel like that's the job of zoning. That's what that's for. You know, that way you can address these issues on the front end. You don't have to, you know, they're not gonna get permission to use property in a way that violates the terms of the zoning. And then you don't have to worry about trying to kick somebody off property. I mean, obviously, there's existing use issues that would arise here with the crop of current uses, but into the future, I think that would address a lot of that. Yeah, and I think also, I mean, we're just talking about leased property, just the leases here today, not the waterfront as a whole, which is, I think, a broader issue. You know, how do we wanna direct the future development of our waterfront property is a big issue. Right now, we're just talking about these leases here and kind of how we want to direct their future development. And I think this suggested code change is a great way to kind of, you know, provide sort of a roadmap for sale of these leases if that should arise. You know, and I think it gives the harbor board an opportunity to weigh in. Gives planning and zoning opportunity to weigh in, and ultimately the assembly. And it seems, you know, maybe there could be a few tweaks. I'd be happy to hear what members of the harbor board have to say about these terms. But this, at least with respect to leases, this seems like a great start. You know, because it's and again, I'll say I think the issue with enforcement and the kind of confusion about the use of these leases arises from the fact that, as Director Cabrera pointed out, we don't really have a very complicated zoning scheme here in the borough. We you know, we could probably, I think, delve into a little more detail here on how we specify uses in certain areas. But that's also that's a big issue that I think a lot of people would like to weigh in. I mean, it's a major step, I think, to go from what we currently have, industrial, and then to specify, well, no, these are absolutely going to be restricted to a specific use. And that's, you know, you're really placing a lot of confidence in your ability to predict exactly how that area is going to need to be used or how things are going to change. And I'm inclined to believe in the case of the harbor, you know, we can make that prediction pretty confidently because we know that's a crucial asset, crucial piece of infrastructure here in town. So probably, I think zoning is a great thing to consider here going forward. So, you know, I won't ramble on too much more, but again, I think this ordinance definitely bears close scrutiny. It looks really good.
So maybe we have some kind of a proposal then. The proposal would be, okay, press the brakes for now. Let's not sell any more land until this or something like it goes through the works and we have some kind of idea about how we want to treat this land once it is sold. Is that, I mean, that sounds good to me for now. But, you know, so now we gotta take a look at what the attorney said. The harbor board should, planning and zoning should, and then the assembly should, and then we should have something that's ready to shoot out the, you know.
Gonna take a lot of discussion, but I agree to have some kind of a roadmap that we can agree with and we have community buy-in on it. I mean, when we start, you know, we got, you know, lease people, and I haven't read the individual leases, you know, but I mean, you know, they were gas stations, they were this, they were that, you know, and now they're, you know, something, and I don't, you know, so I can't say they're violating their lease because I haven't read them. So I'm not gonna go there, but we need to have a clear route if we're gonna sell any more leased land. And I kind of like the idea of the zoning, like Liz Cabrera mentioned, you know, it's all industrial now, but if you still have, you know, these leases under, you know, I hope it wouldn't be too confusing.
A lot of heads nodded when she described the overlay.
Yeah, the overlay,
Yep.
So Clerk Thompson.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that the ordinance change suggestions has been drafted just by me, just from going through the process of selling property and then the process of the week on sale and so many questions and unknowns. So I really do ask everyone to look at it carefully, and if you have suggestions for the process, let me know, send me an email, give me a call, whatever, I'll add it to it so that a good product can go before the assembly and then they can decide. And in the end, what the process should be.
All ordinances are reviewed by Attorney Heidemann, correct?
Correct.
So
Yes.
she'll see if there's any red flags that come up as far as legal issues or whatever.
And the good thing is Attorney Heidemann always worries about us restricting ourselves too much. So in order to make it as black and white as we want, we have to explain to her why we want it this way and all of that. So that's all good stuff.
Yeah, when we sold the property to the Wecons, one of the things we looked at was putting covenants on it. And I was asked that question the other day, and I delved into that pretty significantly and walked away from it from the standpoint of enforcement. You know, who's going to monitor and who's going to enforce it, and then you're gonna have to go to court and so forth. So I chose not to do anything with it, but I want to go back to something that Member Fine Walsh said, is that I think there's two parts to this. I think there's a part related to the existing leases that we need to get a process in place. But the bigger question in my mind is that I really think that we need to look at what do we want to do with that waterfront in the long term? You know, we've had it for marine industrial type businesses. Is that what we want? Is that what we want? And I like some of Liz's idea, but when we look at this, this is going to require one major amount of work to look at this and to go through it, because you're going to have to lay it out. You're going to almost have to look at it parcel by parcel. And then that would come back to really what you want to do for the first part related to the sale of these. And I'm kind of leaning the same way that I think we need to put a hold on selling the properties until we work some of this through. Thank you.
I talked to Jim Stromdahl for quite a while a few weeks ago, just to get more of the history, because I was pretty young when this all happened. And I would say, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jim, but the marine part was just as important as the industrial part. It was meant to support the economic activity in the harbors. So we're not talking like hard industrial necessarily, but marine related commerce maybe would keep something to keep in mind with the zoning.
One thing we have to keep in mind, you know, it's the only waterfront we have, and two, times have changed since this concept first came to fruition, you know, 1980, is that what you said, Glo? So, you know, back then, I don't think we had much of a tourist industry, and there was a lot of things were different, so. And, you know, what's it gonna be in 20 years? What's it gonna be in 40 years?
What was there prior to all of this were warehouses, you know, that
Right, I
were
remember that.
accessed at high tide,
Yeah.
and that, you know, now with the crane trucks and drive downs and all that kind of stuff, that a lot of that activity has moved up, you know, further away from the waterfront because we're able to, and it's, you know, cheaper land and all of that to develop. And so, yeah, we don't have much left, and we have to really be careful, I believe. So.
I agree
Thank
with
you.
being careful, you know, and, you know, if you don't have a crystal ball, I mean, how do you see what the best use is gonna be 30 years from now? But you can always change, I would think, this, overlay idea, as, you know,
Yeah,
as time goes on, it's, you know.
That sounded, you know, like the best thing so far. You know, prior to that, the assembly, you know, the harbor board and the city councils believed that by not selling it, they retained the control. And that was really the way that you know, they maintained that. But now that we're getting into a second generation, you know, the first generation is now gonna look to retire. I've had conversations with 3 or 4 of the leaseholders that are watching this escape plan for themselves, and, you know, does the harbor want to buy their building? You know, because that would be the easiest way out, or what does it look like? So I'm glad to hear that you want to kind of slow down and really figure all this out. And to be also fair to these people that have these investments there. And, you know, they've been a really working part of our, you know, that part of the community, and they've done what they you know, that good businesses there. And so we need to, I think, have a very, and not have a contentious, because I felt like the WeCon turned into a real contentious process, and that was too bad. I didn't like that.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I mean, the mayor brought up the idea of a case-by-case basis, which to a certain degree, they kind of will be anyway, because you have to assess what the needs are. My concern with proceeding as we are right now with selling harbor leases is, to put it simply, the human factor. Say Bob Martin comes by, wants to buy this lease. Well, let's say the current assembly doesn't like Bob Martin. And people can be biased. I'd like to think we're all not, but we are human. And an assembly changes and like, oh yeah, Bob should have that piece. I worry about the potential of an overly subjective nature of the criteria. Something I know as an assembly person I would like is to see, if I had my way, which I rarely get, is for the harbor master and the harbor board to give us some criteria that you guys think are would make sense to you. I mean, you're the harbor board for a reason. This is, I like to think it's your wheelhouse. I value the feedback you guys give us immensely of, criteria of when would it make sense to sell these borough leases? I mean, there's an individual sitting here today who's wanting to buy one. He's got a great plan. But it may not always be that way. As the mayor said, the last one, and I listened to a lot of that on the radio, seemed really contentious. And I think by streamlining or at least putting more rigorous criteria involved, it could save everyone in this room and the leaseholders a lot of headache, heartache, etc. So just something to put out there for you guys. I know that I think it would help a lot. Food for thought.
I think some more food for thought is leasing land you're gonna put a $500,000 warehouse on or something. That's why you wanna buy it. You wouldn't wanna lease it and then, I don't know what you're planning on building, but you know what I'm saying? Cause what would be the exit plan? Maybe we should come up with an exit plan for businesses that are 25, 30 years old and then you look around and go, well, I can't sell it. Maybe we should wrap our mind around that one too.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to speak on this. Been in the private economy almost my entire life. People know the job I have now, so I've finally gotten into a different economy. But I would caution that we don't get too restrictive against private economy. They're the backbone of this town. I understand trying to come up with an overlay, that seems to be a good term to use, however, and then referencing businesses that aren't following leases now. Those said businesses do a lot for this community and generate a lot of revenue and a lot of goodwill. And they're important businesses. I just want to caution that I also don't agree with fully stopping the process because you, the government, us, we take a heck of a long time to get anything done. And I don't want to see this process stopped. Need to talk about it some more, but I don't want to see it just, I don't agree with the other harbor board member that we just stop it. I don't agree with that at all. We opened Pandora's box by the first sale. Not we, but it was opened. And one interesting thing I've been trying to wrap my head around too is that you for an obvious reason, you made a private business automatically gain a very valuable entity or a value to their own business. And now you have other businesses wanting to do the same thing. And I think it's exceptionally unfair. No matter, I'm not looking at big value and little value of whatever business might be doing it, but going to Assemblyman Schwartz's comment there of the asset. Yeah, it's like leasing a fishing boat. You want to own it. You want to own that. And so that's kind of my caution in that. I don't want to see the process stalled to the point of also losing the potential of investment or purchase. Like to circle with that idea real quickly, right back to item 1 is I would like to encourage the assembly to investigate the possibility of allocating the property tax paid from said sale. They could do that through many ways. I'm not an assembly or attorney, on the assembly or an attorney. You might, for example, have these funds be a simple pass through the budget. And they're just, that way they come to the general fund, and they go to the harbor. And that'd be a way for harbor to retain revenue. When I first got on the harbor board, not a big speech, but when I first got on the harbor board, some people might have thought I voted differently, but I had a talk with the harbor master and agreed, you're sitting there for the betterment of the community and the betterment of the harbor, same as assembly people sitting there too. You mix your own personality in with that, but you put a different hat on when you come in there. And had I might voted no before, I'm voting yes for sales. To, of course, obviously what I think is going to be the best sale for the person. And that sale might be a bus garage or a coffee shop. By doing the first sale, we've changed the entirety of the picture, in my opinion. And even though there's other rules we're going to try and follow, I'm a staunch supporter of small business. We've got hundreds of small businesses floating in that harbor right now that spend a lot of money here, and other small businesses to support that and retain that. I know the argument, oh, the land sitting there is not doing anything. Well, it is doing something, but it could be doing something better. And no, we don't have a crystal ball, but we can make the best decision we can at the present time with, what is presented to us here. And I think I'd hate to see, I watched the video of the meetings, and I watch the meetings as much as I can. And that last zoning meeting, I'd hate to see us lose an opportunity there for a young business to get started. And to do that, they're going to need to bankroll themselves, and they're going to need an asset, which is what we just did with the week on sale. So zoning is zoning, and we can probably work with that faster than putting a halt to everything and reworking every little bug, I think. But that's just my 2 cents for now. So thank you.
So on that, so there's a argument that I think is the elephant in the room, which is the fairness argument or the precedent setting argument. We set a precedent with the WECONs, and it would be unfair not to continue on with that precedent. And I've thought about this a little bit, and I think that it's a bad argument. And the reason why, let's take an analogy. I'm a parent. I have 2 kids. They want some, one of them comes up to me, he says he wants some candy. I give him a piece of candy. He starts throwing a fit, and holy crap, that was a mistake. I acknowledge my mistake. Now the other kid finds out, oh, he got a candy. I want candy too. So now that I've acknowledged my mistake, I made a mistake. Should I give the other kid some candy? No, I should give him a peanut butter sandwich. Calm them both, give them both the peanut butter sandwich, calm them down, have a little compromise. And I think that's what we should do, right? And really, press the brakes, figure out what's the best route going forward, and not, we don't have to go down a slippery slope. It's not something we need to do. So
Well,
that's my 2 pieces.
a good start to a discussion that might take a little while to come to a plan that we can all agree with. And well, everybody probably won't agree to the plan, the certain aspects of it, I'm sure, but that's just the nature of human beings. But this is a good work session between the 2 bodies, I think. And where we go from here, at some point, if it comes before the assembly, we'll have, that's when we'll have public input. And, you can always send emails. You could always get your public input to the assembly members and harbor board members, or just send them to the clerk and she shares them with the assembly if they're addressed in that fashion. So
to that point, Mr. Mayor, could we somehow revisit the process that, again, speaking to the borough leases that are primarily harbor related, could we somehow flip that an application comes in the door, within 10 days, it has to go to the planning and zoning, And then somehow, if we hear wind of it, it trickles back to an advisory board. Then they get to give you a little advice after there's already been it's just a really, can we redesign the whole process for
I would-
applications and for,
I would think the harbor board should be
wouldn't you?
involved in the,
What do you think?
in the decision-making process.
But like,
Before it goes to a decision-making board.
Well, and then like what happened with just last week, the Ocean Beauty, I didn't even know about it until I saw it in the agenda. You know, the application to switch the hands of the Ocean Beauty lease to a new potential owner for you know, for parking. You know, that never hit anyway. So what I'm saying is, could somehow we have a different protocol for leases that doesn't, and I don't know if that requires going to changing.
Yes, it does.
Debbie's got a good draft already, just,
It
first time I saw it was this evening here, but she's already done a
Yeah.
lot to
Okay,
iron that out.
sorry.
Yeah,
That
that's
would be
step
great.
2 in that little draft things.
Sorry.
So that is a decision that has to come before the assembly, if I'm not incorrect, or am I correct on that?
On the assignment, yes.
Yes.
Got ya.
lease,
Okay.
It has been postponed,
Right,
yes.
right. Got.
So one other item that I noticed with the Wecon sale was the lease agreement it's like 30 years old. It's antiquated and there was no exit clause. So
They're
that created,
55-year leases. All
Yeah,
of them are
but
55
the
years.
lease itself, yeah, that gets revisited. I mean, it gets reapplied every 5 years in writing. But the lease itself is decades
55
old.
years, yeah.
Yeah, but there's no exit clause. So so like Rob says, this leaseholder builds a $500,000 building.
There
And they
might
have
be
no exit
ulterior
clause.
motives.
They have no
You know.
exit clause, or they have no mechanism for them to get out of it. So that kind of created a whole separate can of worms, effectively, that made us make a difficult decision. Forced us into a tight spot. So yes, I think that these leaseholder agreements need to be reviewed and maybe rewritten. And we still have the one leaseholder who's not complying with it. We need to decide how we're gonna approach that. Because, are we gonna ignore it? I mean, we're here to make decisions. And we're brainstorming here, and we need to come upon some decisions. Otherwise, we're gonna be right back to where we started.
Yeah, I don't, I wouldn't have any interest in leasing land to build a big building that I'd have a hard time selling. That's all I'm saying. And,
Except that's what the Wecons did.
yep,
Comes down to a business
but
decision.
I mean, in the future, there's a lesson there too, and we can put our foot down, that's fine. Made a mistake. You gonna lease land that you can't sell, or you can't sell the building on? I don't know.
There's 4 that are in the wind.
Yeah.
You know, that are pretty much the exact same.
Yeah, but
Just to clarify. I'm sorry, I would just like to say that, they could have sold their business and continued the lease. And when the 55 years lease is up, then they just apply for another lease and continue a lease. I'm just saying there actually was an exit clause, is an exit clause in the Wecon leases, even those old leases. Yes, they're old. And yes, the newer leases are written differently and, are better. Totally agreed. But there was other ways than doing what happened, with the Wecon.
the only way they could have
Agreed to
got out of
that.
it is if they carried the loan. And because.
They also could have found a buyer that could have afforded it without the bank. It was the bank that was not willing to loan money because the land was leased.
That happened
Yeah,
just, I one
that's
of the other
rare.
leases.
That's
2
rare
years
to
ago.
find somebody that comes along with enough money, like, here, $500,000. I'm like, if
2
you
years
have
ago.
that kind of money, why do you need to start that business? You can start your own. So there's, yeah, they could have carried the loan, but that's risky. because 2-3 years into it, if it doesn't work, they just default and walk away.
But is that the borough's responsibility for to negate their risk?
No, but
when they
there was
entered
nothing in
into
the
it?
lease agreement that give the leaseholder the option to effectively get out of it. There's no provisions.
And you're right, Glow, that's a decision they made 35 years ago.
They did, but they made that decision because there was no other good options.
I know we
Oh.
have a situation that we, call it a mistake, call it whatever you want to do, or, you can't go backwards. But I think we should possibly be careful about talking about individuals and, that we're involved in any dealings that we've done, that might not be the best, thing to do. Yeah, so. But anyway, so
What comment,
where do
please?
we go from here? And then there was another, how does the borough decide on competing proposals? So I guess if you're a non-leaseholder and the leaseholder that's on the land wants to buy it, can someone else say, no, I want it? So that, it's another little glitch or whatever you want to call it. Yeah.
Chris is waiting there before.
Pardon me?
Mr. Mergus is waiting before.
Oh,
I'll wait till you're done and then speak.
yeah. So anyway, I was just going down the list. I didn't recognize you. Go ahead. Thank you, Jay.
The one thing that bothers me is the word compliance. And I've had 2 leases now for almost 15 years, and those leases have brought in a tremendous amount of revenue and taxes and income to the community. But it's always been a feeling of them versus us. And I'm often reminded, hey, in your lease, it says 30 days is all we need to boot you out. And so in that time that I've had that lease, I've never had anyone from the city or borough now approach me and say, hey, is there anything that we could do to enhance your business, to enhance your lease? And so I'd like to see maybe some really cooperative moves from the borough on that. Thank you.
Well, I think, yeah, I don't want to get into talking about specific leases, but I mean, the borough is currently trying to develop a wash down pad and, I don't think it's the intent of, I know it's not my intention of saying leaseholder, you're gone. I think it's probably would be a big improvement to that site for leasing, but that's, just a quick response to that, but,
But that does lead into, there are some real specifics, clauses that we have to in the future be able to enforce, especially if we're talking about Scow Bay. As we look at plans for that, that includes development of that property at triple the size and the location of a lease today that, that is right in the middle. We may have to at some point address that we need to change the location up. And so I think that is very important that everybody goes into some leases with their eyes wide open on that. Yes, there could be a time where you have to vacate this area
it's footprint.
because we have a greater plan. And we tried to address that in these leases, especially at Scow Bay. We have tried to address that. And part of it is that, yeah, in 30 days or, you'll know more than 30 days, but I think that is, the port is the port, that port property is one thing, but now we've got Scow Bay that that's our #1 project and we're really actively,
Harbor's #1 project,
yeah, and we're actively,
so.
pursuing.
That is a piece of leased land, but that's a little bit beyond this.
Yeah, but they're part of the leases,
It is,
that's
yeah,
why
yeah.
and so everyone is kind of different.
Yeah,
The
And
Ocean
that's-
Beauty lease is really a lot different than, maybe what Brock is proposing or something like that.
I haven't seen that proposal, so.
Well, that was, the Ocean Beauty one was the one before you at the last meeting that you tabled or whatever you did, so.
So any thoughts on, I mean, we have some ideas, we've had some good discussion, but how do we, what's the next step? I mean,
Can the harbor board talk about it, send it to the planning commission, have them talk about it, try to, come to some kind of conclusion on that and send it to you guys? Is that?
well, that's probably a proper chain of command, but then like the clerk mentioned earlier, that if you have ideas, language or what that you'd like to have added to this ordinance, if we're talking an ordinance change, excuse me, reach out to her, give her that, because she's the one that has come up with what ordinance change we've got so far, just by the discussions we've had, and we haven't had a group discussion like we're having now, and I think planning and zoning is important in that discussion as well. Go ahead, Bob, and then Tom.
I was just gonna make a suggestion is when we go forward, the clerk has made a reasonable suggestion to start with and take comments. We'll go forward, let the harbor board respond back to you and go forward, then bring it back to the table for everybody to take a look at and see if, if it meets what, the discussion we had around the table. That would be kind of step one in my mind. There was another point here talking about the leases in terms that they're not up to date and they're not being controlled and so forth. That's a separate issue that I think needs to have some discussion with the manager on. I think it's out of the purview tonight, but I do think there needs to be a discussion on it. Then the third one I would say is suggestion is that there was discussion around here tonight, and I like some of Liz's ideas, but I don't know enough to be able to say boo about it, so to speak. I would like to see some little more meat put on the bones to see what the suggestions are, and how that would work. And maybe Glow and she could get together, at least so we could have some discussion on it at some point, in the near future, as a suggestion.
Also in this discussion, we can't just limit it to, the harbor board, planning and zoning. The assembly, we need public input. And how can we have a group session like this with, would you call it a work session? Not a work session, you call it a town hall meeting, what do you call it how do we ask for the public's input, the harbor users' input, anybody in the public's input on this topic? Because it's a pretty important round of decisions we're gonna be making here, or decision that we're gonna come to at some point. Tom, you had a.
No, kind of to your point, I feel like it's incumbent upon the assembly or some member to propose an ordinance change as an action item, and that would kick off a public hearing, a public hearing opportunity. It would be great to get input from the harbor board and planning and zoning prior to proposal of an ordinance. But that's more of an informal process, and frankly, I don't think there's a specific way to go about that. I think the formal way is to propose an ordinance update and start the 3 readings, and then get input from the public bodies that we rely on for that information. I think that's probably the best way to go about this, and that's also the fastest way, I think, to address the simplest problem first, which is the disposition of the tideland leases. We can set up a protocol for directing those, because as we've all discussed here, right, there is significant interest in purchasing them from various people. So probably good to address that issue first and put some kind of, protocol in place for addressing that. I think this ordinance suggestion here is a good start, but probably needs to be updated before being presented, as an action item. I think that's probably the best first step in light of this discussion. It sounds like, on both the part of the assembly and the harbor board, there's no desire to kind of urgently follow through with any of these, with any of the interest in acquiring these leases before there's some sort of protocol or roadmap and some ordinance in place. So it strikes me as the best option going forward. It's going to be a little while before the assembly meets, but I just think this would be a good thing for the assembly to address as an action item in the near future.
Bob,
Yeah, happy to have a harbor board meeting. We don't get much attendance. That's one reason I thought this work session, and it was good. It drew a lot of people out. We got a lot of people here, but sometimes a harbor board meeting will have very little public participation, and because, I usually run those like a work session anyway. There's plenty of time to go back and forth. It'd be a great place to carry this on now that we got the ball rolling. So I'm happy to have some, harbor board meetings, and they're easy to, it's a good time of year for us to do it too. Thanks.
So, we approved the Wecon sale because we were trying to protect the fishing industry. We had a legendary mechanic. The intent was to pass on that knowledge to preserve and protect the service industry to the commercial fishing sector. And that was, I had a lot of input from some very, influential people in this community that thought the same thing. I think that there's been a lot of good input here. I like to think that Casey may brought up a good point that maybe we should task the harbor board with coming up with proposals, concepts based upon what we've discussed this evening. Moving forward, I also think that maybe we need to have another look at the lease agreements with the leaseholders, the current leaseholders. We have, like I said, the one leaseholder that's not complying. Maybe we need to incorporate that. He has 2 leases. Let's clean the slate. Let's clean things up, move forward. And if we can task the harbor board with coming up with some sideboards for moving forward, I think that would be a good thing. And I apologize if I seem upset by this, but that Wecon decision, like Bob said, the red face test on Main Street, it was a hard decision. And I personally got a lot of feedback, and it's a can of worms. And this is a very complex situation that we're in. And the other thing moving forward, I would, based upon Mr. Randrup's comments about moving forward, I think the mayor also made comments about moving forward, about the needs of the community, 20, 30, 40 years from now. And the intent of the waterfront master plan is primarily commercial fishing minded. And that, we know what's going on now with fish prices and world market conditions, and the needs of the community and the marine waterfront plan may need to be adjusted to reflect changes in our economy in the future. So I would encourage the harbor, if we can task the harbor department, or is it the harbor department, the harbor board, to come up with conceptual ideas to propose back to the assembly, I would encourage you to think along those lines.
So I feel like we have 2 different kind of proposals. I feel like Tom was saying, top down kind of thing, and I feel like you're saying kind of bottom up right now, but I'm not sure if that's
I
a
agree with,
contradiction or.
I'm not, maybe I didn't completely grasp what Tom was saying, but I felt like he was saying that the comments that Liz made about zoning being applied. I agree with that. I think that, I would like to see something along those lines, something that would, be able to, contain the leaseholders or property owners, excuse me, moving forward to whatever, whatever that means as far as their economic value, whether it's marine or commercial or, so on.
I think what Tom was getting at is if we're gonna have public input, how do we do that? So it's kind of a both and,
Right.
you combine what he's talking about until we can get an ordinance, and then it's 3 readings and there's public input. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so.
My comment was mostly to the fact that I think the back and forth between the harbor board and the assembly is mostly informal. As far as the assembly is not directing the harbor board to do anything. That's where this is a informational conversation. You know, I mean, the assembly can do what it can do and the harbor board can do what it can do. And I'm saying, yeah, on the assembly's end, I think that's how the assembly can be effective by proposing an ordinance update and kicking off a public
It's out
hearing.
of,
Yeah.
out of line for the assembly to ask an advisory board. That's why they're generated to research it, so we don't have to research it. And then they come back with a plan that they've drafted. And by having suggestions on an ordinance change, you know, from them, and just some ideas is I can't remember what let's call it, the zoning change, the isolated zoning regulations in industrial property, maybe come up with some ideas of, is that a good idea, you know? Look into that a little bit. But yeah, I think we need to dig into it. I don't know if you want to call it deeply, but I mean, under a microscope, we need to really look at it closely, but I don't think we should be having the same discussion in a year from now. You know, I think we need to keep the ball rolling down the hill. Bob?
Yeah, I think you guys have given us a good boost just by having this work session, an hour and a half, to put a lot more horsepower behind us taking the issue up, and an expectation that we'll have some more stuff for you guys to chew on. And I just wanted to say one thing I thought about tonight. I think, Mr. Mayor, you left a good foot in the door when you said you'd handle these things on a case-by-case basis, because that's what we're doing. There's no inevitable ball rolling here. We have time to come up with the policy, and there's no assumption made that these lots are all gonna sell. So I think if we look back and look at the meeting in August, there's good precedent for that, where we haven't set a precedent. It was a one decision thing, and we need to do our job and take it from there.
Gonna be really good harbor board meetings, I can tell you that right now. Be a lot of arguing.
Well, that's why you have, you know, elected people to.
Little humor there, just some humor.
So anyway, Scott, you have another thought?
Yeah, I was just gonna kind of lost my train of thought there for a second, but yeah, I mean, I feel like, yeah, we can task the harbor board. I think there's been some good conceptual ideas brought forth. And I would encourage you guys, there's a lot of depth and experience there to be able to come up with, you know, to continue this discussion and come back with something maybe more concrete based upon what we've talked about tonight.
And there's nothing to be said that you know, you guys have a harbor board meeting and we don't have another, instead of taking an official action by putting an ordinance, you know, forward on the agenda for an action item, and we have another work session maybe, and then to talk about the language on it, or to see if we're in agreement, why put an ordinance forward if there's gonna be amendments and you know, we still have to vote on it, you know, to finalize it, but you know, that's just throwing out thoughts there.
It might be, it might be nice to have a harbor board meeting, invite, I know PBOA was, you know, they were invited to listen in. I know all the leaseholders were invited to listen in. And so, you know, maybe at a harbor board meeting, we can invite them to talk, and then maybe have another kind of similar meeting like this to really float some of these ideas. And
So I've got a question for you, Glo or Bob. So when you have, is there a spot, excuse me, on the harbor board agendas for public comment?
yes,
So you could advertise it such. Debbie?
I just wanted to comment that we do need to remember that we do have an application to purchase a piece of property from a
Exactly.
business. It is not a current lease, and we do just need to keep in mind that he probably needs a place to do business out of, so we don't want to take too long. I do want this to be in-depth and a good process, but we do have to be respectful also of that applicant's time.
Exactly. That was one of the reasons I was thinking we need to keep going. And whenever we, if the get an idea and that I'm sure that we think might work, you'll run it by our attorney so she could.
Before I bring any ordinance before you guys,
Right.
it will go before the attorney.
Yeah, and if I can jump in, this is Steve.
Yeah.
And Mayor, I know you know this, and this, no decisions were made tonight. So for example, the business that Debbie is talking about, we will continue the process forward. Eventually that comes back to the assembly, and then the assembly at that point can decide, to postpone it or move it forward. But, we will keep a close eye on that because, the potential the business owner deserves that. And we do have a process to follow that we'll use until we get a different one.
Right. I agree, but Scott.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with the pumping the brakes. I mean, we're kind of getting slammed here with multiple issues. And we have the one current potential sale that I think we should, we've already decided to move forward with it. So, I mean, I think we need to continue to entertain that because, but at the same time, I think if there's any other proposals for purchasing current leaseholder land in the near future, we need to table it. Because we need to figure out how we're gonna deal with these things and move forward because it's just too much.
That would be an action item at an assembly meeting, then I assume if that was the course you wanted to take. I mean, I don't think it's an administrative decision. It's something we'd have to take an official stand on outside of a work session. Just as a data point, I guess. I'm not speaking out of line on that, am I, Debbie?
I'm sorry, Jay, I kind of missed what you said.
No, it's 8:00.
After an hour and a half, people's focus,
No, it's good. We need to wrap it up, I'm sure, but just saying, like, if we wanted to actually put a moratorium on those leases, that would have to come from an official decision in an assembly meeting with accompanying wording. That's not something decided in a work session or by administrative staff, yes?
Correct,
Thank you.
yes.
Okay, so, I'm gonna get up to speed on a few items with the clerk tomorrow and, since I missed the last meeting, but, yeah, if we get something from the harbor board or anybody sitting there, shoot some ideas about, to us. That's so then this is recorded, so public can listen to it if they're interested and, or talk to one of us, talk to the harbor board and give us some input. It's important. So any other topics people want to talk about this evening? Or do you think we, in regards to harbor leases?
Oh, boy.
Well, I guess I suspect the harbor board should be getting together real soon again to talk about this. We should,
Very soon.
we'll have an email thread going.
Our next meeting is March 4th,
Correct.
something like that. Yeah. So, yeah, we need to keep this in the forefront.
Thanks for coming, everybody. Sorry to tell you. Come to the harbor board meeting, you can be able to talk more.
Yes, we're done.
Donna, are you signing off?
No, mine too, dude. It's good. No worries. I think all of ours are.